Hey guys, a lot of people have been asking me how they can, increase the efficiency of their VOD reviewing. And, it's an interesting question because a lot of people don't really VOD review as much as they should. But I'm here to tell you here's when you actually should be VOD reviewing, and here's probably the best way to go about doing it. So, number one, when should you actually be VOD reviewing? VOD reviewing is very similar to coaching in that it's really something that you need to do when you're stuck, and it's not necessarily something that you have to do, especially if you're a lower ranked player just trying to gain experience and familiarity with the game. It's not really something that you need to do. You're probably better off spending time playing more games rather than spending half of your time VOD reviewing every game that you play. So don't worry too much. It's actually probably a good thing if you're like a lower ranked player or newer to the game that you spend more time playing rather than VOD reviewing. That being said, just like with coaching, when you are going to look for VOD reviewing, it's when you're really stuck on a large number of games, only winning 50% or less of your games at a given rank. So let's say you've played your last 40, 50 games, mostly on your main champion and stuff like that. And on your main champion or your main two champions or whatever your champion pool is, you're only winning 50% of your games. And you're really struggling to climb and you're just not making any progress over a large number of games. You feel like you're playing over and over again, but it's not doing anything. You're not learning anything. You're not making improvements. That's bad because at that point we're wasting time. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to VOD review instead of coaching, right? Like for one reason, coaching sometimes is going to cost money, or you're going to have to find the right person who understands your role in your champion and has like good availability that matches your schedule and stuff like that. And it's obviously a lot more inconvenient to go out of your way and find a coach than it is to just VOD review your own games. Benefit to coaching, of course, is that you're going to have like a higher elo player who understands the game and maybe can offer some different perspectives or show you some things that maybe you weren't able to see on your own. But VOD review is a great way to essentially, self-teach yourself or coach for free. And so we need to understand that's the situation that we'd want to do that in. And it's if we're really stuck, or the higher up we're getting, the more efficient it can be, because you're probably going to be able to see a lot more of what's going on with the game, the better you are at the game yourself. So you're going to be able to do a better job of self-teaching yourself if you understand the game better and you're, platinum, emerald, diamond. That's a rank where it's going to be maybe a little bit more difficult to make improvement, and you're more likely to be stuck because you're starting to get to the upper echelons of how good people are at the game. And so at that point, you're going to need to maybe consider VOD reviewing more frequently. But here's the thing, right? If those are the situations that we VOD review in, how do we actually go about doing it efficiently? And one of the big pieces that I think people are missing about VOD review that's not opening their eyes in the way like a coaching session would is that they don't know what it looks like to play their champion at a super high level. And so even people who do go and spend some time VOD reviewing probably don't spend nearly as much time watching other people play their champion as they spend watching themselves play their champion. And that can be a big difference, because essentially what we're looking for in a VOD review is these kind of conceptual like epiphanies or aha moments where we're realizing that we're doing something very different than other people that's negatively impacting the way that we're playing our champion, or that's really hurting our win rate. And so you're going to be able to find that, especially on your own, even if you're not getting a coach. If you're trying to find that on your own, one of the best ways to do that is to just look at the way that somebody who's really good on your champion plays it, and look at the way that you're playing and realize, oh, this person's doing this all the time and I never do that. Or, this person never does this and I do this in all of my games all the time and it seems pretty bad. So those things are going to help make some clear distinctions between the way that you're playing your champion in, let's say, like plat or gold or whatever, than the way somebody in Challenger is playing their champion, or in Grandmaster or whatever. And I'm going to show you some just kind of easy tricks to be able to find people a little bit easier and stuff like that. So, if we go to a lot of different websites for League, it could be op.gg, it could be League of Graphs, but a bunch of different ones, we're going to be able to actually find players really easily who are good at certain champions. So for example, on op.gg, we can go to champions, can select our favorite champion, like let's say Braum, and then we can come down here and we can find, like me, and open this person's profile, and then you can copy their username and their hashtag thing at the end. And then you can come into the client and you can actually go to your profile in the client, and you can actually just search in the search bar right up here. You can just copy paste that into the client, and all of a sudden you're going to be able to bring up somebody's profile, and you can go to their match history and you can watch some of their games. You just download the replay file and open it just like you would your own replay files out of your match history. So now all of a sudden you have access to not just the way that you're playing your champion, but the way that somebody who's really good on your champion is playing it. Now, a couple of little things, like for op.gg, this list that it's showing here, and you can click on this to see a more extended list, is just showing anybody who's Diamond 2 plus, and then it's just ordering them by how many games they've played this split. So for example, you might find that some challenger player, I actually don't see any challenger players on here, but you might find that some challenger player playing a game on Braum might be more enticing than watching some master player playing a game on Braum, who knows the champion pretty intimately or is a one trick because they're playing so many games on it, but may not be as good of a player as somebody who's in challenger. So another way you could look at it is using League of Graphs. So if we go to home on League of Graphs here, we can go to rankings, best players, select our champion here, can select our region. I don't think you're going to be able to search in the client cross region. So you're probably going to look for somebody in your region. So we could find like this guy here, we can copy his thing. And now if we go back to the client, same thing, we can just copy paste his username in here, go to his match history, and we can watch him play a game of Braum. So that's one way. I suppose if you really wanted somebody who's challenger, this would be a little bit more time intensive to find the person, but we could definitely go to like the leaderboard here, and we could just look until we see somebody who has played like Braum in their top 3. Now, Braum may not be the easiest one to find because Braum's not actually a very popular support champion. So this may be a little bit doomed for certain characters. Okay, so like this guy is challenger, and Braum is his second most played champion. He's probably, like most challenger players, probably camping challenger though. So let's see if he actually has some recent Braum games in his match history. No, he does not. So, we're not going to be able to find a game that we can view there. Important thing to keep in mind is that replays are only available on the current patch. So, for example, even if the patch was just yesterday, you're only going to have access to view games from today. And so that's obviously really going to limit your options. Well, actually, there's a Braum game here 7 days ago from this guy. Let's see if we can look at that one or not. So yeah, that patch is going to be annoying, and then you can only see their last 20 games in their match history, even including, like ARAMs and other stuff like that. Yeah, so unfortunately, it looks like this Braum game was... it shouldn't be. Oh, that's because we're hovering ranked solo. Yeah, because of these ARAMs and stuff like that, the Braum game's just not in this guy's match history. So, we are going to have a little bit of a hard time finding that there. But you get the idea, right? You can use these kind of tools to search out players that might be good. Oh, here's another guy. You might be able to use these tools to search out players who, are good at your champion. See if this guy a day ago played a game at Braum. And this guy is not playing ARAM, so that's kind of nice. So we could go back to the client here. And so while this guy, might not be as big of a Braum one trick or something like that, he might be a better player in general, and so we might be able to glean something from watching this game from him. So that's kind of the idea, right? It's just... a big part of VOD review is opening up your eyes to the way that you should be playing your champion differently. And if you don't have a baseline comparison to make, then how are you going to know, how you're supposed to change the way that you're playing? It's going to be, about the same as you would get from reflecting on your mistakes that you made in that game. You're just going to be rethinking about this situation that happened and thinking about, okay, I know I could have played this a little bit differently here. And that's fine, and that'll help you improve a little bit. But if you want to make massive improvements in the way that coaching can help people all of a sudden shoot up like a rank because they've realized something big and made a massive improvement, in the same way, VOD reviewing can be that for people, but only if you have a good eye-opening comparison about the way that somebody plays your champion to compare it to. So I recommend, before you VOD review ever at all, just go watch a game or two of somebody in Challenger playing your champion and look at the combos that they're doing that are different than you. Look at the items that they're buying that may be different than you, the runes they're going that may be different than you, how often they're choosing to use their abilities. Ask yourself, if I was in this situation, would I be throwing my ability out here or would I be holding it? Okay, you're going to find a lot of times that at a higher level, these Challenger players are holding their abilities when I would just want to spam it or use it. That's what helped me improve a lot. So that's number one. Number two is that if we hop into an actual VOD, I've talked about this before when I talked about valuing mistakes, but when we hop into a VOD or something, first off, focus on games like this. Like, I'm not going to show it because I don't want to go through a game where I went 0-8-6 on my YouTube channel. Fair enough. But when you're VOD reviewing, you should be focusing on games where you either did really poorly or where you did well but ended up losing the game, and you feel like that was an important game where you made some key mistake even though you were playing pretty well overall that could have turned things. But don't spend all your time focusing on VOD reviewing games where you played really well and everything just went fine. You're not going to gain as much from that as you're going to gain from these other ones. Now, that doesn't always mean that that you should never VOD review those types of games, but obviously games where you made more mistakes are going to be better to review in general. It can be helpful to review the way that you play the game positively too. So on the flip side of that, if you did have a game where you just did really well, it can be helpful to look at like, what did I do, especially in the very beginning of the game? What did I do that snowballed this game in a really positive direction that maybe was different than other games? The other thing that's going to be important here that I would recommend when you're VOD reviewing is, for most players, you should be focusing on VOD reviewing the laning phase. The reason for that is because the laning phase is the most repetitive and most important part of the game. In solo queue, games are really won and lost mostly off of what's happening in the laning phase. And because games are going to be determined, or people are going to give up or start trolling or something if you don't do well in the laning phase, it's important to have that part down. And you're going to find a lot of similar situations happening in the lane over and over again, whereas the later into the game that you get, where people are moving all over the map and there's a lot of macro going on, there's more variance. So the earlier you are into the game, really two things happening here. The earlier you are into the game, the less variance there's going to be, meaning the more similar the situations are going to be. It's going to be the same start when you run out of the fountain every single game, basically for the most part, right? It's going to be the same fighting for level 2 in that matchup every single time for the most part, right? Like, there's very little variance that goes on at the beginning of the game. It's also, because League is a very snowbally game, the most impactful part of the game. If you get a kill at 1 minute, it's a lot bigger than getting a kill at 10 minutes, and that's a lot bigger than getting a kill at 20 minutes, for the most part. I mean, it can be a little bit different because a kill at 20 minutes before like a Baron or a Dragon or something like that can be big, and we talk about that a lot too. But for the most part, when you're playing through solo queue, you just need to solidify a really strong winning laning phase, much more than 50% of the time. And if you're winning your lane much more than 50% of the time, you're going to, have a 55% win rate, 60% win rate, and you're going to be climbing overall. So it's really important to focus on the laning phase. Now, there's little notations here that are really helpful, right? Like we can see here, let's see, I'm on red side. So when there's a little red line, that means our team got a kill. When there's a little blue line, that means enemy team got a kill. So, and we can see here when we hover over this, like the icons of who's getting killed and stuff like that. So we can see here that like Lucian killed me here. So we can like go to this time and take a look at what happened in this situation here where I died. So, like, this is a pretty unfortunate scenario. So, like, if we're VOD reviewing this, I think this is just kind of unfortunate. There's a couple of things, right? Like, Lucian's got his abilities down for 3 seconds. I think Aphelios, actually, if he keeps running at them here, would have won this fight, probably. I guess Lucian does have flash and stuff like that. But, you know, I still thought, and I thought in game, that Aphelios could win this. The other thing is, if we look initially, Aphelios was really running backwards because he didn't believe that we won this fight. And right here, if you look at Aphelios' positioning, you can see that Aphelios, like, doesn't really use his movement at all. So that's tough. You know, you're gonna find situations where you're like, okay, I thought we win this 2v2, which is why I jumped in and hit everything. I tanked the hook and everything like that. Like, it just looks really good. So, you know, I'm of the opinion that Aphelios wins this fight every time, and it just didn't work out. So that's the kind of situation where I'm going to say, unfortunate that I died. I'm not necessarily blaming my Aphelios, but in the majority of situations, we go for this fight here and we win it. So, you know, we see their jungler top too. It's like not a bad fight to go for at all. It just didn't work out in this one game due to execution, right? So it is what it is. So I wouldn't worry about that one too much, right? We can skip forward. The big thing here too is you can see like gold, you know, team gold here. The plays that are going to be the most impactful are generally going to be, like I said, these early plays in laning phase, because the laning phase is going to snowball the game and lead to things happening a certain way in the later parts of the game because people have certain items or certain levels or are far ahead or whatever. So laning phase is really important. But another big thing, especially if you're getting into, I really recommend ending the review once you get out of laning phase, to be honest. But if you're going to focus on after laning phase, and certain players, like especially this Zed player I've been coaching recently, right, have actually demonstrated pretty good laning phase, like better than average for their rank. And his problem was like not grouping with his team and throwing objectives. So there are going to be some players where if you're finding that your laning phase is looking really good, you're getting ahead most of the time in your lane, but you're still not climbing, then you need to think about reviewing the mid game and the late game. Am I not grouping when I should be? Am I throwing objectives? Am I getting picked too much in the mid game? What am I doing to cost my team the game that's not in the laning phase if my laning phase is always going so well? That's when you could look at the mid game. But for the most part, just focus on the laning phase. Now, if you go look at the mid game, it's best to look at plays like we can see where dragon takes are happening and where barons. Those are going to be important, and those are probably going to be where these big gold swings are going to happen. But what we care about really the most is where are the big gold swings happening. And so we can actually look, I believe, if we exit this really quickly, like let's look at a game like this. If we go to graphs, can we see, yeah, okay, so we can see like a big gold graph. So before you go into the VOD, what I would recommend doing is I'd recommend taking a look at the game, going to overview, and taking a look at the gold graph. And it's like, okay, you know, really there's a big gold swing in this game somewhere around 15 minutes where the red team goes from being ahead by 592 gold to being down by 2,473 gold. So what happened here between 14 minutes and 16 minutes that caused a 3,000 gold swing in this game? So if we hop back into the VOD, right, and you know, you could just note these down, that one, plus there was like another one later. But if we just go to 14 minutes or so into the game, you can see that we get double killed bot. And our mid laner gets killed. And they get bot turret, which is first turret gold as well. So we're looking between 14 and 16 minutes. And they kill Aphelios again. Honestly, I don't really know what happened. I guess it's mostly this double kill bot into Aphelios coming back bot lane and getting killed. But, yeah, so I guess that's it. I mean, 2,000 gold is a relatively small spike, actually. You know, really what we'd be looking at is, you know, what's going on. So we get back ahead. You can see they were ahead for a little bit, but then we get those kills back, and then, you know, we're back to being ahead a little bit. What happens, what goes wrong for them, you know, for the other team? Like, what goes wrong for them at 24 minutes to the game just really starts snowballing out of their control. So use this gold graph to understand that, like, we could see actually here, it tells us here, really things start to take a turn for the worse for them here, because it looks like Nunu kills Aphelios and I, but then their team dies to our whole team pretty much. So, you know, it looks like there's a big team fight that we win right here, and that's why they end up losing. So you might review what happened leading up to this team fight if you're the other team, for example, or if you're wanting to review what you guys did well. So you're going to use these combination of things, right, to go into the game recognizing that, look, if I'm a lower ranked player, if I don't play the game that much, I just don't need to VOD review all the time. But if I'm getting higher up in rank and I have a better idea of what's going on with the game, I can understand hypotheticals of what's happening in the game. Like, if I do this completely different thing, how is it going to change the game? If I go top here instead of walking bot here, how is that going to change the game? Some people really aren't able to do that, and that's okay. It just means that you haven't really learned enough about the game in order to understand, like, what's probably going to happen if I do something completely different at this point in time. How is that going to change the outcome of the game, or how the next minute of the game is going to unfold? If you can't even do that yet, you're in no position to VOD review. But if you're really stuck, even at a lower rank, you're going to want to VOD review, but you're going to get a lot more out of it if you're comparing yourself to somebody who's really good at playing your champion, and then looking for, okay, they do these three things really, really well that I like about the way that they play their game in Challenger. Do I do those things in my games? And then you watch a game that you played and you're like, wow, I'm really inconsistent at these recall timings. They're never getting caught, you know, staying on low HP like I am, or not having spent their gold like I am. They're, you know, holding their abilities when in a lot of situations, you know, I'd be just firing off my abilities here because it looks like we're fighting or whatever, but they're being really patient with their abilities. Or, you know, this guy's roaming and I'm never roaming, or you know, whatever the case may be. You're going to find things that that player is doing that you're not doing in your game, and it's going to be eye-opening when you go back and watch your own games how much worse you are than this other guy playing your champion. And then you're going to see, okay, I can do these things and it'll help me get a lot better, and then you'll get a lot more out of the few times that you actually do bother to VOD review. Again, another really important thing is that you just focus on the laning phase, because that's the most impactful, consistent, least variable, you know, most in your control part of the game that you can play. And then once you break out into the mid game, it can be a total mess, especially when we're talking about like low elo macro. So focus on getting your laning phase down consistently and just VOD reviewing your laning phase, rather than trying to VOD review the whole 30-minute game. You can just focus on the first 15 minutes and how that may have snowballed the game in a very bad direction for you, especially if it's a game you did really poorly in. Now, if it's a game you did well in laning phase and then through, you're probably going to want to look at the mid game, and in the mid game, take a look at these situations here on the gold graph where there are massive gold swings. Okay, red went from being ahead to being down quite a bit. Okay, blue went from being ahead to down quite a bit. Okay, the game was kind of stable, and then all of a sudden, like, blue went from being down 1,000 gold to being down, you know, quite massively, in the game snowballing out of their control. So what happened, you know, during this time frame? And we can see there was a team fight here. And even if these situations, look, sometimes, like every game, it's team game, like every game of League, sometimes there are going to be situations you VOD review this team fight and you're like, you know what, I think I did what I was supposed to do during this team fight, or I think that I was in the right place at the right time. It's not really much I can change about this. I think my team just messed up. That's okay, but that shouldn't be your answer, like, most of the time, right? Because there are going to be situations where you're going to need to change something. Otherwise, you're wasting your time VOD reviewing if you're just going to, blame your teammates for everything. But let's be honest, that Aphelios was no good. I mean, we can look him up. He's probably filled. But listen. Sometimes it'll be things that are harder for you to see. So let's say we looked at this team fight and, one player on their team like wasn't at this team fight, or, was like in base buying an item or something, right? Like, or he, was trying to do something else on the map and his team ended up fighting. When you look at that situation, sometimes there are going to be things that are hard for you to see, like, hey, had I backed earlier and bought this item, I would have been at this fight. Or was me split pushing at this time really worth it, considering that like my team was probably just going to fight here and I didn't even get anything split pushing, or what I got split pushing wasn't worth what we lost in the fight. And you're, again, results based analysis is not great, because sometimes it is worth it for you to split push even if your team makes the mistake of fighting without you, and you need to recognize the percentage of the time that your team's going to fight without you and throw the game versus the percentage of the time that your team's actually going to play properly and you're going to be fine split pushing. And you need to take that into account, the expected value, or the average outcome of what you'd expect, not just what happened in this one game. But you need to recognize not just like little mechanical mistakes that you made, but like, okay, how would the whole game have changed if instead of dying 1 minute before this fight and then being off sync with my team, if I was there? Or if I had gone back a minute earlier and bought this item instead of waiting for this time, could I have been there? Had I not messed up and died this one time in lane, would I have gotten that item 100, 200 gold earlier, and 10 minutes later, I would have had this item and been with my team or whatever. So there are things like that that are going to be harder for you to see, especially if you're not working with a coach and you're just VOD reviewing on your own. It's going to be harder for you to see those things, but they can have impacts like that. So I hope that this helps you guys, when you do bother to VOD review, do it in a little bit of a quicker, more efficient way. And good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.